Welcome, welcome, welcome. Special guest, special guest. I've known this man for 10 years, I think, maybe back in Texas,
It's
a
been a
long time
while.
ago. Yeah, it's been a while. Allen Mendenhall, uh, friend, colleague. I've known him for a while. You helped me out that one time with that little legal issue and you gave me some advice. That was great. Uh, he, Dr. Allen Mendenhall at Troy University. He's the associate dean at the Sorrell College of Business and the director for the Center for Political Economy. Allen Mendenhall is the associate dean and Grady Rosier professor in the Sorrell College of Business and executive director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy. You can also visit him at allenmendenhall.com. He holds a BA in English from Furman University and MA in English from West Virginia University, JD from West Virginia University College of Law, LLM in transnational law from Temple University, Beasley School of Law, and PhD in English from Auburn University. I hold a BA in English from Furman, and Beasley School. Okay. Before joining Troy University, I was an associate dean and founding executive director of the Blackstone and Burke Center for Law and Liberty at Faulkner University Thomas Good Jones School of Law in Montgomery, Alabama. I edited Southern Literary Review for over a decade and was a visiting scholar at the American Institute for Economic Research, an adjunct legal associate at the Cato Institute, and Mises Emerging Scholar with the Ludwig von Mises Institute Canada, an associate at the Abbeville Institute, that's where we met, a Humane Studies Fellow with the Institute for Humane Studies, a staff attorney for the Chief Justice Roy S. Moore of the Supreme Court of Alabama, and Assistant Attorney General in the state of Alabama Office of Attorney General Penitentiary. I have served on numerous boards of organizations as wide-ranging as the Alabama Public Television Foundation Authority, the Young Professionals Board of the Alabama Humanities Foundation, the Society for Law and Culture, a division of the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal, Trinity Christian School, and the Philadelphia Society. I'm on the advisory council of the Ludwig von Mises Institute Master of Arts degree and certificate program. My academic writing has appeared or is forthcoming in such peer-reviewed journals and law reviews as the Journal Jurisprudence, the Canadian Journal of Law and Jurisprudence, the Political Science Reviewer, the Texas Review of Law and Politics, European Journal of Pragmatism and American Philosophy, the South Carolina Review, UMKC Law Review, University of Dayton Law Review, Indiana Journal, Law Journal, Elon Law Review, Academic Questions, Georgetown Journal of Law and Modern Critical Race Perspectives, Michigan State Journal of International Law, the Independent Review, Libertarian Papers, Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, Modernist Cultures, and the British Journal of American Legal Studies. My writing for popular media has appeared in Newsweek, Fox News, Fox Business, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, American Spectator, Pacific Standard, The Hill, Los Angeles Review of Books, American Conservative, Daily Caller, Federalist, Public Discourse, Law and Liberty, Freedom, Liberty, Real Clear Markets, the University Bookman's Daily Signal Chronicles, the Christian Lawyer, the Conversation, and elsewhere. It's also spoken at Harvard, Brown, Georgetown, and Francisco Marroquin University, Furman University, and George Mason University. Did we get anything wrong? Is that a fair background?
I think that's great. Yeah, you may have just repeated yourself on the first two slides.
Oh, sorry.
But you.
Well, it's extra important. We wanted to put some emphasis behind it.
Yeah, no, I thought that was great.
Let's get right into it. Now, 10 years ago, or abouts there, I went to a conference on nullification by the Abbeville Institute in Texas. If anybody wants to see that, I gave a speech. I think I was like the only liberal there, and I made a lot of great friends. Just type in Marcus Ruiz Evans, Abbeville Institute Conference. How has political division changed from that time? Obviously, there was some political division. CalExit was big. Texas was already interested. The Abbeville Institute was talking. Where was political division at then? And where is it now? Is it better? Is it worse? What developments have you seen? Just as a thoughtful person, a professor, somebody who's looked at politics, and frankly, just as an American with eyeballs, where do you feel it was a few years ago, and where do you feel it is now?
Well, I believe the fracture and division have accelerated. Whether that's a good or bad thing in terms of whether it's better or worse is it sort of opens the door to your perspective on division. I mean, in some respects, division is an inevitability within a society of very diverse peoples, especially a country as large as the United States of America. In such a territory, you are bound to have division. And that can be a good thing on some levels, or it can be a bad thing. I tend to think that the political division at this point has magnified, and that we are looking at the beginnings of an era in which you will see some forms of dissolution, some forms of secession, some forms of um, political realignment along the along the political spectrum. So a perfect example of this would be to look at the states and what they are doing in the ESG movement. Of course, ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governments. It's that acronym that refers to investment. I mean, I like to say that you can think of it in two ways. One is on the micro level, which refers to sort of the frameworks or strategies that corporations use internally. But there's also the macro view, which that would be ESG would be the non-financial standards and factors that corporations, institutional investors, financial institutions, banks, sovereign wealth funds, governments, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, et cetera, use when they allocate capital or assess risk. So this movement has started in the capital markets, but you see a very stark division in where different states are falling on this. So as we sit here today, all 25 Republican senators have announced their opposition to ESG. In my state of Alabama, you can include the governor who signed on to a proclamation that Governor Rick DeSantis issued on ESG. In my state, you can also include our attorney general. But, and of course, former President Donald Trump has also come out swinging against ESG. So there's not a lot of gray area when it comes to the right, although within the states, you'll find that there are entrenched interests, banks in particular, sometimes business associations and lobbyists are still trying to come down on the pro ESG side, even when they're in red states. That will ultimately be a failing position. The banks are not going to be able to ward this sort of ESG pushback off. And the division is fracturing along that red state blue line divide, red state blue state divide.
Republicans swim against the tide of ESG money from Reuters. For an organization which professes to love free markets, the U.S. Republican Party is surprisingly keen to meddle in financial decisions. Its representatives in the U.S. Senate on Wednesday voted to overturn a rule that makes it easier for retirement fund managers to consider sustainability factors like climate change when making investments. Yet Republicans face an uphill battle against flows of money and their own voters' preferences. What I have not heard about this. What is the ESG decision, and why are Republicans pushing back against that? And how does that mean more political division is coming? I'm ignorant on this subject. Sorry. Try to be more prep. What is ESG? Why is this an issue? We'll start there.
Okay, so ESG was first articulated at a United Nations conference co-hosted with the government of Switzerland back in 2004. The conference is called Who Cares Wins. You can look up Who Cares Wins and find a report in PDF form that outlines all the findings and results of the conference. And basically what happened there is that these governments brought together the most powerful banks and institutional investors and said, what we need to do to push environmentalism and to push social causes is to collaborate and invest pension money in those types of causes. Now, they were careful to say, we want to do this in a way that maintains our obligations, our fiduciary duties, but we want to start investing government money in capital markets in a way that will push these different causes. And these institutional investors would, the big three are sort of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And if you Google around enough, you'll find that they don't just come under criticism from the right. There are plenty of people on the left that criticize these institutional investors because of how powerful and wealthy they've gotten off of other people's money. These are companies that make money with money. And the left may accuse them of woke washing or greenwashing because they will purport to champion different environmental causes or different social causes when really you dig deep enough, you figure out they're really just getting rich off of using people and saying they support all these different causes. But what they'll do is they'll invest state pension money into ESG weighted portfolios that typically underperform. There were a couple years there, maybe not quite two, but in the sort of pandemic era, right before the pandemic, you saw sort of a spike in interest in ESG funds and index funds that performed fairly well temporarily, but have since taken a major hit. But we're talking about institutional investors who are, making a lot of money by, for example, sovereign wealth funds, countries that have giant oil reserves, and they're investing the money on that. States that have pensioners, the U.S. federal government that has pension funds. I believe the rule that you were referring to when you were reading a headline a second ago, or reading a piece of the article, referred to the new Department of Labor reg, which was in response to an executive order that Joe Biden issued in 2021, mandating the institution of ESG throughout most federal agencies. It didn't name all the federal agencies, but basically any federal agency dealing with financial institutions. So we're talking about anything like from the Treasury to the Federal Reserve. All of these institutions had to operationalize ESG. And we're really talking about the control of capital flows.
So it's a bunch of companies have decided they want to stand for being woke, and they're going to follow these principles, ESG, basically meaning, we're going to do these woke policies for the environment or government or society, and also encouraging people to invest in that. And the Republicans are saying, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't want to invest in companies that have decided we're not just interested in profit, we're interested in having a woke agenda too. And that seems to be where the split is. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's accurate. The only level of nuance I would add to that is that these these are typically financial institutions and institutional investors. So corporations typically on their own don't really want to go woke. We saw what happened with Bud Light and the Dylan Mulvaney. They lost millions and millions of dollars. It was terrible marketing and advertising, but why do companies do these types of things? Well, they typically do them under pressure from institutional investors. BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard have together around $22 trillion of assets under management. And what they do is they go in and they buy massive amounts of shares in publicly traded companies. And that way they can leverage their power in the boardroom. They can go to annual meetings, or they can have proxy advisors like Glass Lewis or ISS go and vote shares on their behalf. But we're talking, a concentration of power unlike any we've ever seen in the history of humanity. One Harvard law professor predicts a concentration of shareholder voting power consisting of just 12 mutual fund advisors holding the majority of shares of voting shares in publicly traded companies in the United States. This is pretty shocking stuff. The big three, which I mentioned, that hold $22 trillion in assets under management, they hold about 27.6% of all votes cast at the annual meetings of S&P 500 companies. So they are the ones that are engaging corporate boards of directors and pushing boards of directors into political activism against the interests of the companies. The companies don't really want to do that, but if you're a company, you have to do what your stockholders, what your shareholders, your owners want. And if you have a bunch of institutional investors coming in and they're not really that interested in the future of your company, they've just bought your company to use it as a vehicle for pushing social causes, and that's where the big problem comes in.
So how does Republicans pushing back on ESG investing equal more division in America?
Well, I think you just see a divide along the lines of the states that want their state government money supporting social causes, left-wing causes, and the states that are finally saying, wait a second, nobody in this state believes in this stuff that we're pushing. Why is our state subsidizing all these issues? Like, for example, I'm in the red state of Alabama. Why, when the voters have spoken clearly on issues like abortion or issues like gender reassignment surgery, why in the world would the state of Alabama's government money be indirectly subsidizing Planned Parenthood or any number of organizations that don't fit the agenda of most people in Alabama? And most people in Alabama are saying, wait, why is our money funding our enemies? And people are just now waking up to it. So it's only a new phenomenon. It took the left 20 years to institute this entire process, this entire ESG program, and to really give it a bunch of legs here. And, it's got buy-in throughout much of Europe and Canada and several other advanced nations, but there's some pushback coming here in the southern states. Yeah, and DeSantis is one of them. He signed onto this. He actually orchestrated this proclamation, I guess is what you call it, among Republican governors that say, who say, we're going to push back. We're going to make sure that our state stands against ESG and we'll push back against it.
So the Hill magazine, and this is very recent. I'm very impressed with this interview so far. So on March 23rd, that's not very long ago, DeSantis, 18 states to push back against Biden ESG agenda. So this is relatively new. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on Thursday announced an alliance of 18 other states to push back against President Biden's support for environmental, social, and corporate governance investing, known as ESG. DeSantis joins with the governors of Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming in what is called an alliance to push back, in addition to Florida. So that's about 19 states. That's almost half the union.
Yeah, and we're talking about the weaponization of finance at this point. So it is really a shocking thing. People who have not been paying attention really just need to start paying attention and to look at this issue, because in my view, this is the biggest issue that has ever occurred in my lifetime. This is the defining issue of our age, and there is a battle going on within financial services institutions and within capital markets that is unlike anything we've ever seen before.
So let me correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I'm hearing, maybe I'm getting this wrong. We've had political division. It's been on social issues. It's been, between media companies, been between social media companies, et cetera, stances. Now we're starting to see, for the first time ever, political division get into the financial market, a sector you never expect to see political division. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, for a long time, financial services and investors were pretty conservative. I mean, it's the nature of that business to do two things: maximize returns on investment and mitigate risk. And so it was typically a very conservative industry. But there was a very open push to politicize all of these types of institutions through institutional investors that took place among very powerful governments and NGOs and intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations. And it's been going on for quite a while. And I agree with you. This is where the latest battle is taking place. Now, from my own perspective, I really don't want to see corporations politicized in this way. I'd rather see corporations just stay out of politics altogether, because the purpose of a corporation really is to maximize profits for shareholders. And people think that sounds callous, like, oh, you're just about making profits or whatever. But that's not the case, because it's really, profits are what enable corporations to participate in charity and to engage in philanthropy, to give back to their community. And any corporation that wants to be successful at all has to treat its customers well, has to treat its employees well. This is just part of what good business involves. But now that corporations are becoming increasingly politicized, you see them getting into shadier and shadier activity. The more they get involved in politics, the more they hire lobbyists, the more they shift from the shareholder to the stakeholder model of governance, the more you see corporate executives doing shadier and shadier things because they have wider and wider latitude to cover up what it is they're doing. If you make the standard for your CEO, your success is whether you are increasing profits. That's a measurable thing. You can say, well, we made more profits than we did last year. Is total revenue minus expenses. We know what that is. It's a simple mathematical exercise. But when you start redefining the purpose of corporation to include all types of social issues and social causes, then you'll start finding money flows going in odd places. You'll find ways that CEOs can cover things up. You'll find corporations saying that they're doing one thing when in reality they're doing other things. You've got executives trying to cover up their executive compensation because they want to continue to make a lot of money, but they want to hide the ways they're doing it. And you'll find that when companies are beginning to fail, they are it's much easier for them to cover up their failure. For example, Silicon Valley Bank was heavily invested in ESG. It was a disaster. If anybody had just scratched a little bit under the surface, they would have been able to see this thing is tanking. But instead, because they were promoting ESG and they were promoting all these social causes and they were trying to be tech savvy and hip, people didn't notice that what they were doing was really, really bad. And then eventually things hit the fan. And we were, it was exposed. We saw everything it was doing. How many more banks are in that exact same position? How many more corporations are really, really struggling, but we don't really know the extent of it because of the commitments to ESG. And ESG only really works as an investment strategy on capital markets if it has full systematic and systemic buy-in. And if there's any resistance to it, then ESG weighted portfolios, ESG investments will fail because think about it. The whole wisdom behind prudent investing is that you want to diversify your portfolio. You want your investments going into as wide an array of sources as possible. So that if one industry starts having a bad time, you're invested in another industry that might be doing well. You have all sorts of offsetting commitments and investments. But ESG automatically narrows the range of possible investments to only a few industries. And it excludes industries like in my state, timber, agriculture, mining, all these, automobile manufacturing, because it's all these industries that are really great for states like Alabama, but they are politically disfavored industries in the ESG movement. And there are a lot of other things, and I don't purport to be an expert on environmental, renewable energies and those sorts of things, but I know that there's a great divestment going on from nuclear power. And from what I understand, nuclear power actually tends to be a pretty safe and healthy way of getting energy relative to alternatives. And we'll see also a lot of ESG investments going to certain solar and wind power projects that eventually get abandoned or they are trendy. Some company starts it up and runs with it with the money that it's gotten, and then it fails and the money has been wasted. So, it's a very, ESG is a very complicated thing to talk about because it refers to, when you talk about environmental, social, and governance, you're talking about every single field of human activity falls under this one.
I like woke investment firm seems to summarize it pretty well. I remember Solyndra or whatever was the solar companies we invested in with Obama. I had a friend who worked there after they got the money, and he said it went from a normal business to clown world. And he was there when they started getting the money. And he's like, I could see immediately how things were operating differently. It was all about, we're getting all this injection of cash. Let's rearrange the business model around that instead of making cash. So, and then also you can look at just coincidentally, all the woke movies. I won't go into it for the algorithms, but you can type in Woke Hollywood movies have failed, and Hollywood companies have lost millions, if not billions, of dollars. One of my favorite ones was Halo. Halo was a video game, very popular with men.
Remember.
They came out with the movie, and it was very woke. And the writers for Halo said, we didn't even watch the video game. We like watched, some feminist movies and based it on that. Tanked. I mean, all their money invested in that thing, gone. They could have gotten everybody who played that Halo video game to watch the series, and they probably could have relaunched the Halo video game itself, all wiped out. So if you were trying to make money, whoa! And then there was my favorite was The Witcher, was a TV series on Amazon or something. The guy who played Superman, he was playing some warlock, and he was going through medieval times. Anyways, the people who wrote the series admitted they didn't even watch the comic book that it was based upon. And then in an interview, and they just wanted to have some other woke principles, and they even kind of trashed the readership who read the original Witcher series, and they destroyed that television series within a month. They lost all their viewers. Fourth season or third season wiped out. So I mean, these are real things where this happens, and if you thought you were going to make profit, it's gone. I mean, it's wiped out. Let's get to some more political questions. I do want to ask you some economic ones in the future, though. Let me show you this map.
Okay.
And then I want to ask you what your opinions are. Is polarization a new phenomenon? Is it old? Is it because of the elites? Is it because of the people? These are ongoing debates, and I wanted to ask your opinion of them. And then I wanted to show you this map. So is political division bad, I guess, in comparison to the past? And is it really the elites making it happen, or is it the people themselves? Just as a professor, as a scholar, but also as an American who's been around for a couple of decades, are the people getting more polarized, or is it just the media and the elites making it happen?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I do think that technology has accentuated and highlighted divisions and maybe caused division and fracture in ways that weren't possible before. Now people are able to get on Facebook and see the political opinions of associates or colleagues, or maybe not necessarily close friends, but acquaintances who otherwise may have been, may have held views that were completely unknown to the person. So I do think that, you get on Twitter and you immediately see virtue signaling, and you see political posturing in ways that weren't possible before social media. Now, having said that, I do think that there is it's the old term, the silent majority. I think there are people who do not buy into what powers in the media or communications or the universities are peddling. The ideas and theories that are ubiquitous within certain institutions, such as those I just mentioned, do not align with the values and beliefs of most ordinary people who would rather, watch a football game, and, they want to know what they are going to have for dinner. They want to go to a restaurant and order a pizza, and they don't really care whether they get a plastic or a paper straw. They'd rather have a straw that didn't disintegrate in their cup, but they're not going to make a political, stance on this. They just want to go through life. They don't care about these things. They just want to be left alone. They just want to, raise their children and not have to be harassed. They don't want every single decision they make to have to involve a political element to it. What shoes you buy, what types of shirts you wear, what types of cars you drive. It's the politicization of everything, and that makes life miserable. People want to escape politics. They don't want to be immersed in it with every single decision they have to make every day. And I do think that this ubiquitization of politics will come back to bite principally the left, because I believe that this is more of a phenomenon on the left. I also think, you'll hear refrains from the left such as silence is violence, meaning if you stay out of an issue, if you don't take a position on it, you are by extension supporting the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Silence is violence. You are implicated in some form of oppression by not taking a stand. And that means that everybody is going to have to make a choice. Well, a lot of people, they don't want to make a choice. They don't want life to be harder than it. Life's hard. I mean, we have all kinds of issues with mental health problems. We have a loneliness issue. We have recently come out of a pandemic. I mean, people are struggling with just life. Life's hard enough. And when you don't have to make decisions, I mean, that was the one thing about the pandemic is, whether you're going to get masked, you're going to have to carry out a vaccine card. This is sort of like getting branded with, who you are politically, what you wear, everything you do is a marker of identity. And that makes people uncomfortable. Most people, I think, just want to live a life that has happiness, where they can enjoy their families, they can enjoy the community of their friends, they can be involved in all sorts of associations, whether they're little leagues or civic clubs or charities, but they don't want their entire life being defined by politics.
I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. Just to back up what you said, silence is violence. I'm out here in California, know a lot of liberal activists. The other one they use is, I don't want an ally, I want an accomplice.
Mm.
So being an ally, I support you, used to be good enough. Now it's, I want an accomplice, meaning you have to actually get involved in whatever I'm going to do, even if it's dangerous or risky to your background. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're a bad person. So I have seen the language shift gradually from support and tolerance is no longer good enough. You got to be in the trenches with us to the degree that I view as appropriate. And if you're not, then you're an automatically ist.
Well, I think that's right, because what they're saying when they issue words like that is that there can be no neutrality.
Right.
Well, the reason we have institutions of higher education is to maintain a principled neutrality. People are supposed to sit back and not make up their minds right away. So this is why the university has portrayed its own mission. People are supposed to suspend judgment until they have pursued lines of inquiry to the point where they are convinced that one course of action is right or wrong. If they have not reached that conclusion, they really should suspend judgment. They really should continue the pursuit of truth and inquiry rather than settling definitively on one position or another. But the problem is when you start getting this rhetoric, when you start militarizing all discourse, then people feel that they have to make a decision. Okay, well, I'm not fully convinced yet, but if I'm going to take a side, it's going to be on this side or it's going to be on that side because my friends are on this side, my friends are on that side, or my colleagues are on this side, or my colleagues are on that side, or my industry favors this, and by extension, my pocketbook is benefited if I support this cause, and that's how people are making decisions without full rational inquiry occurring.
I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 5 or 7 years ago, public academia was talking about, no, it wasn't public academia. It was corporate America was coming together to issue reports about all the college students coming out that they had to pick from. And they were saying that the critical thinking skills were almost gone. That was 7 years ago. That was corporate America saying, look, we're hiring these people and we've always hired them for decades. We've noticed this new crop has no critical thinking skills. My mom, I won't get into detail, but she works at a Fortune 500 company. And she said, it used to be when you hired college graduates, you knew they were deliberate and thoughtful. And then something's happened the last 5 to 7 years where that used to be a valuable characteristic. And now it's, you don't automatically know the answer that everybody else has agreed to. You're an idiot. And it's definitively changed. I'm not taking a side on it, but I can totally back you up anecdotally and in some academic studies that I've seen that things have shifted the last 5 to 7 years. Let me go to this map, though.
Okay.
So this map comes from the Wall Street, New York Times. How large is the divide between red and blue America? This is from 2016. This has also been corroborated by NPR, 538, I believe Harvard University, and many others. So if you look at the map in the top left corner in 1992, these are presidential elections by county. In the red means don't run here if you're a Democrat, you have no chance of winning. In the blue means don't run here if you're a Republican, you have no chance of winning. Gray means competitive election. Sometimes we vote Republican, sometimes we vote Democrat. Depends upon the issues, the year, what's going on, who's the best leader. 1992, half of America's gray. You go to 2016, almost all the grays wiped out. And you have almost only exclusively landslide voting counties, which means, don't even run here if you're the other guy. There's no chance. That's a 30-year period at the county level showing that basically Americans have sorted themselves out ideologically. That's not the elites. That's the people doing this since 1990. And basically what they're saying is people are moving to areas that fit their politics more, and then basically kind of adopting the local attitude politically over time. There's some debate on if people are consciously doing this or if they're subconsciously doing this, but it's definitely happened, definitely been going on 3 decades, definitely getting worse at every time. Doesn't this make it look like it's the American people who are polarizing and it's not necessarily the elites or social media? I mean, we're going back to 1992. Social media became a problem in 2015.
No, it really does, Marcus. And I'm not somebody that's sort of studied this empirically, and I don't have sort of an in-depth knowledge of these migration patterns and stuff like that. But certainly the maps you're showing,
yeah,
certainly the maps you're showing seem to suggest that, and I would guess that some of those areas of blue, although they look like they're small dots, are where they're the highest concentration of people. Some of those red areas, there are fewer people. That's I think an important piece of information to point out. But I think that the people are sort of sorting themselves out. I happen to know that population is growing down here in Alabama. It's growing in my town of Auburn, where I live, and in general, although we have some purplish little spots of town, in general, we have stayed solidly red. And if you look at one of those time warp maps of Europe, that it just shows, I mean, you've got the continent and that's fixed, right? That's just what it is, the actual landmass. But if you look at the geographical or territorial boundaries within that map and you sort of do a fast forward where they go
right.
Sometimes one piece of land is part of one country, then it's part of another, then it's part of another, and then you have different countries seceding and joining other countries. And so it's really honestly unrealistic to think that for some reason the United States of America as it's currently constituted will exist with the same territorial boundaries and borders as it has now. I mean, it's just unrealistic. It's just not going to happen. Everyone knows eventually something's going to change. It's what happens everywhere. It's an inevitability. I just think that we're maybe in the earliest stages of seeing some form of redefinition occurring.
We're going to get some hardcore economics questions, but I want to knock out the general ones first. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the sitting Congress member on President's Day, called for a national divorce between red and blue because she said we can't live with each other. In response, a Utah governor said, "Oh, Marjorie, you're so silly. We don't need national divorce. We need marriage counseling." What does marriage counseling look like for 300 million people that are as polarized as they've been since the 1960s?
Well, Marcus, as somebody who went through failed marriage counseling personally,
I'm not trying to get personal. I'm not. I'm sorry. I already apologized. Sorry about that.
No, I'm kidding. But I don't know what that looks like, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot of money being spent on trying to heal divides and to build bridges and traverse boundaries and these kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with those efforts, but I think they are also to some degree quixotic because we are now dealing with fundamental differences, non-negotiables, so to speak. I mean, when people have a belief that, you know, I don't know, life begins at conception, and that
Right.
human life, when you're fighting over things that are, about which there can be no compromise, it's difficult to imagine any sort of um, points of agreement, any sort of I don't know, boundary crossings that can occur. And I just used an abortion as an example. That's one that's been around for quite some time, but it's fresh in light of the Dobbs opinion. But I do think that some of this decentralization thing, I think that was good about the Dobbs opinion is decentralizing it, bringing back to the states. I think if there is any hope for the people that don't want a national divorce, which I'm sort of agnostic on the issue. If there's a national divorce, there's a national divorce. I mean, it's bound to happen
Life
eventually.
goes on.
But for the people that want to preserve the union, so to speak, the hope, I think, is in radical decentralization. So the things like the ESG movement that I'm talking about, that all has to get worked out. But leaving it to the different states to decide things rather than nationalizing every issue. The way, I think if there had never been a DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, a lot of the states that wanted to prohibit same-sex marriage would probably have them prohibited. And I'm not passing judgment on that issue on one way or the other. I'm just using it as an example of the unintended consequences of centralizing or federalizing social rules.
Sure, sure. When we look at, so the two things, when we look at marriage counseling, some people suggested, the president could come forward and do it, but Donald Trump is seen as a divisive figure on the left. And then when I approach liberals, I go, but didn't Joe Biden give a speech where he called 78 million Americans basically enemies of the state in front of a blood red backdrop with active duty Marines, which no president has ever done? How is that bringing us together? And then I talked to some liberals about that, and they go, that was a good thing. He's got to call them out. And I go, yeah, but he called out half the country as enemies. Not strong enough language. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not healing. So we have two presidents in a row who can't do the job of marriage counseling. People are going to what you're saying, maybe federalism. Here's my caveat. Here's my pushback. I'm warning you ahead of time. We don't do gotcha journalism. Like, pushback's coming. You can see it coming. It's in slow motion. There was this thing called Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court overturned it and kicked it back to the states. Now, I'm here in California, and I had a lot of friends in New York. Nobody was saying, oh, it's kicked back to the states. Yay. Or it's cool. It was, oh my God, they're taking away a woman's right to choose. It's the end of the world. They're coming to get us. I mean, we were spending California campaign money to put ads in Florida. And people in New York were freaking out. Everybody was freaking out. They're coming to get us. Very few people I talked to were aware it's at the state right. California's never going to take away a woman's right to choose. We're totally safe. It was just, oh my God, they got rid of the federal protection. We're coming next. Now let's flip it to the other side. Here's the Republican Party. Republican Party said for decades, we're the party of federalism. We're the party of less government. We're the party of returning power to the states. The power is returned to the states. Huge federalist decision. First time in decades to get something this big. And then Mike Pence, one of the top-ranking Republicans, says, not good enough. I want a national abortion ban. He's supported by other Republicans, and he's not reputed by anyone in the party. What chance for real federalism do we have when one party outright rejects it and the other one pulled a gigantic, hypocritical move, the likes of which we've never seen in a scale in 33 decades? What chance do we have?
Yeah, no, I agree with you that our politics are fundamentally dysfunctional, principally because of the size and scope of the federal government. I mean, that's really where most of this, problem comes from, is the federal government. I mean, federal agencies are tremendously large. They virtually every single one of them are involved in grants to states, so giving money to states, and every time states, whether it's just some professor at a university or whether it's some city taking some sort of money or some county, municipality, whatever it is, those grants all come with strings attached to them, and
Mm-hmm.
those strings are typically attached to other forms of federal regulation, and so it becomes very difficult to achieve true federalism. And what happens is the stakes of every election escalate every 4 years, every national election, because everyone is so afraid of what will happen if that federal apparatus gets weaponized against their side. They'll say,
Mm-hmm.
well, on the conservative side, they'll say, well, I'm against government power. I don't believe in government overreach, in particular federal overreach. But if we don't yield control of that thing and use it to fight the other side, they're going to do it to us, and it just becomes a tit for tat. And the power itself continues to get larger and larger, and so the potential consequences of the use of power become graver and graver. And
Mm.
everybody gets increasingly afraid about what will happen when the other side gets control of those administrative agencies, or has that executive order power, or whatever it is. So it's increasingly dangerous. And look, I'm for dispersal, decentralization, diffusal of power, whatever that looks like. I am very scared of mass centralization of power, consolidation of power. I try to advocate, however, however I can, excuse me, the the diminishment, the decrease of power structures, which I believe exist, and so it's becoming a more difficult thing to argue for over time. And like a lot of people will agree with you on principle or theoretically, but when it comes to the way they vote, or what types of bills they support, or um, how they talk about people on the other side, they're increasingly wanting to weaponize government against their enemies.
It reminds me of the Marvel series, The Avengers, with all these superheroes, and the main bad guy was a guy called Thanos.
Mm-hmm.
And the last two episodes are about how there were these five stones that controlled all the power in the universe. And for a long time, they were spread out. Nobody had all five stones. Peace. And this guy Thanos comes along. He's like, I'm going to get all five stones together on one
Mm-hmm.
ring. And he does it. And the first thing the other guy says, let's get that glove away from him and use it for what we want. And so the moment you took the dispersed power and you put it in one glove, concentrated all this power, it was on. The Avengers had to fight Thanos, and it was just this gigantic battle. Now, when the stones were dispersed and they weren't on one glove, nobody cared.
Yeah.
Thanos was doing his thing. The Avengers were fighting other bad guys. They were now, the moment you concentrate all that power, it's on. And the last two were the biggest movies where they fought the biggest battles compared to their other stuff. Perfect analogy. It's just too much concentrated power, and it terrifies people. And the moment you get that, everybody wants that glove and then to use it against the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy called Lord Acton in the 1800s, and he said, power corrupts and absolute power absolutely corrupts. He was one of the first guys to say slavery was wrong. He was right about other things. Let me ask you some economic questions if I can, as we're winding down, but I need to ask you this if I can. I have an economics background. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene talked about national divorce, and she wasn't very clear, maybe it was inartful. Did she mean states just splitting up? Maybe. Did she mean states leaving America? Maybe, not totally clear. But what I didn't like was in the newspapers, it went like this. Well, the red states receive more federal income taxes than they put in. If they left America, they would become poor automatically. Into the story. Done. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly fair, is it? Because if you're part of America, you're stuck with our federal regulatory climate and our federal tax climate. And those will never change and have never changed in America. But if you were independent from America, you could start to change things. There's a country called Puerto Rico, and they don't have federal income tax. They're attracting massive amounts of investment out of America. Jake Paul and Logan Paul, they're YouTubers, famous. They moved their entire business to Puerto Rico from America. Puerto Rico's ranked as one of the high income economies, or the only one in all of Latin America because of that. There's also a place called Ireland. Ireland lowered its corporate tax rate to the lowest in the world and became an economic boom. Is it fair or unfair to say, and this is totally hypothetical, if red states broke off, oh, you lost federal money, you're going to be poor, end of story? Or is it more fair to say, yes, you lost the federal money, but you also lost the federal overreach, and you could set your own domestic income tax policies, your own international corporate tax rate, and your own business regulatory climate, and you might have massive explosive economic growth because of those freedoms, as we saw with Brazil and China, two countries who radically reformed the way that they did money and exploded their economies within 5 to 10 years. Is this a crazy thought and I just don't understand it? Or is this kind of basic economics 101, and for whatever reason, everyone in the media somehow forgot this?
Well, I tend to favor your latter explanation, the second explanation, and I think that that is being borne out as we speak. Yes, a lot of these red states, especially in the South, were poorer than other states for a long time, and therefore there were more people receiving, things like welfare, for example, or different forms of tax money. But I think if you look at Texas and Florida as great examples, businesses are fleeing places like California and New York for those states. Delaware remains a strong state for corporations because of its strong corporate laws that favor the traditional shareholder model of governance over the stakeholder capitalism. And I think that even in states like Alabama, which I believe on the state economic freedom indices ranks somewhere around 22nd, so not great, not bad, but you've got red states like ours that still aren't that friendly economically, but if they begin to follow their brothers and sister states in Florida and Texas, would only open up the state for more business. We've got great weather, we've got great natural resources, we have mountains, we have beaches, and I suspect that we've got low taxes, a ton of land, low living expenses. I mean, this is where the future is. We're not going to let Detroit, happen.
Okay, all right, all right. You sold us. Everybody needs to move to Alabama.
Not everybody.
Okay, sorry. Certain people,
or some of you. This is the worst.
Some of you should consider moving to Alabama. Yes, right. So, let me ask you two more questions, though. If you're part of NAFTA, right, the International Trade Group, and NAFTA includes Canada and Mexico, one of the things I heard was, well, if these red states break off, we're going to have to put up borders between states and there will be no international trade and everybody will go poor. And I thought, really? Because the entire world is moving to international trade. We just renegotiated NAFTA and everybody bought on. There are Mexican citizens who are not American citizens and are able to get on trucks and trains and travel through America every day as part of NAFTA. Nobody has any problem with that. That's separate than the immigration issue. If you're a separate country suddenly, like you're Florida, and you leave and you become a separate country, why can't you just say, I agree to the original NAFTA rules that we all signed on when I was a state, and I want them fully, and I'm right back in the NAFTA exactly as it was before?
Well, I think it's basically an economic law that trade is beneficial, that trade is great for economics. And I don't see exactly as you say. I think states will find ways to trade, and people within states will find ways to trade and to reduce barriers to entry. We heard all kinds of doomsday tales about what would happen after Brexit. And there were even punitive measures taken by the European Union to try to get back at England, to try to punish England for Brexit. But although there were some hiccups and there were some issues, of course, as there always are when there are major changes and disruptions such as that, people are going to want to trade with England. England has stuff that other
Thank
people want,
you.
and
Thank you.
and England wants stuff that other people have. It's so long as people have incentives to want things and need things, there will always be trade. And a lot of barriers to trade are politically motivated, and I don't think it would be beneficial to, let's say, breakaway states in the in our country. If there were breakaway states in a new sort of territory, it would not be beneficial for those states to isolate themselves. They would, of course, find every means possible to trade and find new trading partners if necessary, trading partners that they weren't allowed to trade with. Maybe they start trading with Cuba in ways that they couldn't before, getting resources there. I don't know. Like, they're just new opportunities because you have new sort of political realignments, and all this requires a lot of rethinking things and experimentation. And of course, it's not always smooth or easy. There will be setbacks, but I think long-term thinking, people are going to find ways to trade.
And I just thought, okay, so Mexico's a separate country, Canada's a separate country, America's a separate country. All three of them agreed to this contract. All three of us are going to abide by the same thing. So let's create a new fourth country and a new fifth country. Why can't they just agree to the same contract and then they're back in? There's no trade issues. If there's 1,000 rules you have to follow and you agree to all 1,000, how are you not realigned with that trade agreement again?
Well,
I'll follow every single rule you said.
Mexico's, of course, going to want to trade with the people that are right above its border. All
right?
States right above its border. I mean, it would just make sense. Of course, they're going to want to trade with those countries.
Right. Okay, last question. Optimum Currency Area by Robert Mundell. So basically, this is the theory. We have the Federal Reserve. There's 12 districts, I think, maybe 9, 12. And they set the economic policy for the country, but they usually set it based upon how the regional economy around New York, D.C. is set. For example, in the year 2001, California suffered the dot-com bubble burst. That happened specifically because the Federal Reserve set interest rates that were opposite what the California economy needed, but were for what the New York-based economy needed. So they wanted to, I think, cool down inflation in New York. And what that did was that caused an automatic collapse in California, and we went into massive recession. And even Alan Greenspan basically said, whoops, sorry, we had to do what we think's best for the country. So sometimes when you're part of this federal currency union, they will set interest rates that are the dead opposite of what your state needs at that moment, because it makes sense for people in New York and Connecticut and Washington, D.C. If you were independent and had your own Federal Reserve where you could only set policies that benefited your economy, would that be good or bad comparison to now where you can't set interest rate policies that are the best for your economy and you're at the mercy of whatever the Federal Reserve decides?
Well, I guess I'll have to answer that in a couple of ways. The first thing I'll say is that in general, I don't like central banks whatsoever. I don't think that I don't think that they do a good job. I sort of adhere to the Hayekian knowledge problem of dispersed knowledge residing in markets, and that no central planners can ever really fully understand what motivates people at the local level, and never can possess the type of knowledge needed to make those decisions that would design or plan an entire economy. Now, having said that, in the hypothetical you gave, where we're going to have central banks, I think that the more localized they are, the more likely they are to represent economic realities. That the broader the territory, the less realistic, because the less knowledge that can be had of the economics taking place within the territory. Anytime central banks start meddling with interest rates, whether it's to lower them, as they did during COVID, to near zero levels, or when it's recently where they've raised interest rates and in an effort to fight inflation. In both cases, they are trying to combat one problem and will create a whole new host of problems. So every time some sort of central bank takes some measure to fix one problem, they create 8 new ones. And then they go try to fix those 8 new ones, but in fixing those 8 new ones, they've created 16 other ones over here, and it's a self-perpetuating cycle. And I believe, leaving things to the market to fix interest rates would leave you with what we sometimes call in economics equilibrium, even though there's no such thing exactly as an equilibrium. There's no real equilibrium out there in the world that you can point to. But in general, the idea that there are natural processes to the market, and any intervention into those processes will distort that market and have negative consequences. So I think that central banks are little distortion mechanisms, and they're always causing problems. And the COVID example was so foreseeable. I mean, putting interest rates at near zero so that you could increase circulation of the money supply. I mean, anytime you increase money into circulation, you're going to cause all kinds of problems, and inflation is virtually inevitable. I mean, it's an economic reality. Everyone knows.
What?
Everyone knows.
Whoa! Come on, folks. I'm sorry. This guy's saying you just print thin money into thin air creates inflation. That is ridiculous. I have been watching the statements by Karine Jean-Pierre and President Biden, and they say you are so wrong. Yeah, what you're saying backs up what every economist over the last century said, but I'm going to go with the president and his advisor, both of whom are not economists. It can't be true, right?
Well,
you just print endless amounts of money. It doesn't mean more inflation.
Yeah, it's it's funny because we have, and that's just one example, but we have a lot of politicians who like to play expert on things, and
a lot. I watched the interview with Karine Jean-Pierre and Steve Ducey where he goes, "Why are you saying this isn't inflation?" She goes, "Because that's not the definition." And I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah. And these are the people who were saying that, Trump would just make up fake news. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe he did, but you doing it now too, just as good as him. So,
well, I didn't see that issue. I that interview, excuse me, but I like Steve Ducey, and I actually have been on Fox and Friends, and he interviewed me and was very kind. But that's where you want to ask him something like, ask a question like, what about inflationary pressures? Like, right. maybe according to your definition of inflation, but which, by the way, I think it was inflation by that definition. But what about inflationary pressures? Surely you can't deny that there are inflationary pressures.
She might have found a way. I'll leave it there. I was just like, wow, okay. All right, we're winding down. Let me ask you 2 questions. Number 1, I want you to place yourself outside of yourself for a moment. I want you to picture you're somebody watching this interview, and they had a pretty good time, a lot of material covered. It's 5 days from now, 5 days from now. And they don't remember exactly what was covered, but they can't get this one thing the interviewer said out of their head 5 days from now. What would be that super sticky thought you would like to leave the American public with?
Well, I would hope it would be ESG. There's too much to cover in one interview. In fact, I just spoke to the Senate Republican caucus in the state of Alabama last week and generated a lot of controversy in the process about ESG. And a lot of our legislators had either never heard about ESG or were just hearing about it for the first time. And it's such an extraordinary phenomenon. I would encourage you to go read up on it by yourself, because it sounds so big, so global, so massive that you might be skeptical about claims that ESG is as serious or as grave as I've made it sound. I would encourage you to go look that up on your own and see what ESG involves and see how banks and institutional investors work.
What's going on right now? ESG. Ron DeSantis has formed a coalition with 18 states. You can type in ESG, Ron DeSantis, Republicans' opposition to ESG, and it will come up. And this is a relatively new, or at least it's grown into a new state of urgency in March. So absolutely. Last question. I hope you found that this was not gotcha journalism. We didn't try to set you up. Just ask straightforward questions. Even when we threw the hardball questions, we're like, okay, here's a hardball. It's coming, you know. Do you know anybody who might be willing to be part of this honest conversation? They could be on the left. They could be on the right. They could be an activist. They could be a writer. They could just a thoughtful person who can form complete sentences and talk thoughtfully for more than 5 minutes. Do you know anybody like that who might be interested?
Have you had Todd Zwicky on the show?
No.
I think he would be very interesting. Don't ask me to spell his last name. It's like Zwicki, I think.
Okay. Todd Zwicky.
Yeah.
Where's he from?
He's a law professor at George Mason University. And you've probably have you had Frank Buckley on the show? Who's there?
We've had about 2 or 3 people from George Mason University. So
okay.
Todd Zwicky at George Mason.
Yeah, and he's talking about both vaccines and ESG quite a bit. In fact, he sued George Mason University for its vaccine mandate.
Hold on. Todd Zwicky. Let's go, George. Hold on, George. There it is. Zwicki.
Yep.
Todd Zwicky, the Antonin Law School. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. He's a sharp guy. And then there's somebody she's an attorney on the left, but she has sort of a following on the right. Let me see if I can get her name right. Yeah. Okay. It's, I think it's spelled Janine, but it's pronounced Janine, but it's Jenin, and the last name is Younes, Younes, and she's at the New Civil Liberties Alliance. And she is somebody on the left who litigates sort of civil liberties, that kind of public interest stuff, but it gives her lots of friends on the right.
John, thank you. That's perfect. I got both of them. Thank you so much.
Yeah, they're both very interesting people. And I don't know, Janine, I've met her before, but I doubt she would remember who I am. But Todd definitely would.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much. We're trying to keep the conversations going. We're finding that the media won't do this. It's kind of atomized insult, slam-based conversations. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have a variety of interviews, people on the left, people on the right, thinkers, writers, professors, philosophers. And then we were going to do this thing that I remember as a boy. It's not very popular these days, but you have to think for yourself and make up your own opinion. I know. It's a radical idea, not super popular these days, but that's what we're doing here.
That's awesome.
So appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for the recommendations. I will send you a copy of the video in a few hours, and
that's
great. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. I'm glad we could reconnect, by the way.
So am I. It's been a while. It's nice to see people from that. Man, that was still one of the highlights of my life. Just going to the conference and speaking and meeting so many of you guys. There were so many thinkers, so many people talking about where the future of America could go. Just an intellectual, spiritual, uplifting moment.
Well, and you were very supportive of me when the Think Progress guy came after me for just silliness. Like it was ridiculous.
Yeah. Your daughter's African American, right, or something like that?
Yeah, both I have my son and daughter. So my ex-wife is Brazilian,
right?
And they have an African grandparent, but so they've got I mean, I don't really know what you call them, Latino, Latina,
It's
with
called
some black,
Afro-Latino. But yeah.
but they don't look black. They just look like very tan versions of me, but they are mixed race. I mean,
Right. And yet the implication was that you're a white supremacist. I'm half Mexican, but the implication was that I was a white supremacist. So, I mean, it makes sense. People who would never support white supremacy are being called white supremacists because it fits, it's slander. They don't even think about it. That's why I jumped to that, because I was like, when you have to go and explain to your full-blood Mexican mother that her son's a white supremacist, and after 5 minutes of laughing, you have to explain to her that no, this is real, and she cries for 20 minutes as you explain to her how modern American news works, it
yeah,
sticks with you. And then when I saw it happen to you, I was like, oh, hell no.
yeah,
No, 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 I'm not going to roll over for this. We're going to do something. This is ridiculous. You guys are calling people white supremacists who are not, because you don't like what they say. And so you're going for the worst possible insult to shut down discussion. And it's wrong and disgusting. And your behavior actually discourages diversity and inclusivity and people finding love outside of their own particular race. And as somebody who's mixed race, I will absolutely have nothing to do with it and fight it with every last inch of my fiber and being. It's an existential threat for me. So I was proud to do that. I was happy to do that. And I appreciate you joining me. And I will always fight those battles. It's wrong.
Well, thank you very much. And I enjoyed it.
We'll leave it there. I'll send you a copy of the video. Best wishes.
Sounds good. Talk to you
Talk
soon.
soon. Okay.
All right. Bye. Thanks.